3, 2, 1, going live, and boom, we're live. Hello everyone, happy Wednesday. I hope you're enjoying the spring. Tonight, I thought it would be fun to do a little cinematography workshop. You know, I've been doing this for 8 years. I've always wanted to do cinematography workshops, but I've never really figured out how. There's a lot to it, to getting people in person at a studio like this to do the workshop. But with YouTube and things like live streaming, it's now easier than ever to just do a quick 1 hour cinematography lesson. So I'm a big fan of cinematography, obviously, and I want to share that with you. So tonight we're going to be discussing what you can actually do with your camera to get better images, okay? We're not actually talking how to create a story. Obviously, story is a lot to a video. But if you're just looking for more cinematic imagery, this is the video for you. This is what we're going to be discussing tonight. And you can pretty much use any of these techniques that I'm going to go over with any camera. So I obviously have a mirrorless camera, and this is an old DSLR. I think DSLRs have been around for quite a while now. And chances are you might have an old one of these, an old Canon Rebel or something like that. So these, every single technique pretty much that we're going to talk about tonight, you can really maximize with these. These are what I learned on. You can also use a lot of these tricks with point and shoots or handheld cameras like JVC camcorders or anything like that. Whether you're professional or amateur, you won't need any special equipment. The one camera that might have some limitations is a GoPro or an action cam. There's just a lot you can't do with those. They are made for a very specific purpose. You will get a little bit of, everyone will get something out of this, but that one maybe is a little bit more limited. And your phone might be limited. It depends on what kind of phone you have, but most of these you'll be able to use your phone. So without further ado, let's jump in. Hey, Tucker. If you have any questions, please feel free to hit the chat box. That's one of the things about getting to view this live. You can interact and ask questions on the fly. And then also, if you're watching this later in the future, go ahead and leave a comment down below if you have a question. And I'm sure I'll answer that. These don't get enough views or comments for me to ignore them. So let's just talk quickly about camera settings. And this is just going to be real quick before we get into the techniques. Some simple camera settings that can just make your footage look better. Let's start with frames per second. A lot of you understand what frames per second is. It's usually 24 frames per second, 30 frames per second, 60 frames per second, 120 frames per second. Depending on the camera you have, there are limitations with the frames per second. I personally, a lot of tonight is personal opinion. There is a lot of personal opinion in some of this. You will develop your own style as you pick up techniques. So these are techniques to try out. But in personal opinion, I like 24 frames per second. When you set your frames per second on your camera, make sure your shutter speed is twice the amount of your frames per second. So if you have a 24 frames per second video going, you want your shutter speed to be 1/48th of a second, or for a lot of cameras, they don't have 1/48th, maybe 1/50th. And if you set your camera to 60 frames per second, you want it at 1/125th of a second for the shutter speed. This will create a crisper motion, yeah, it'll double your frames per second. Shutter speed is a technique that can be used to enhance a scene or make your footage look a certain way. And I'm going to go over a bunch of examples tonight using some footage that is my own, and I even have some Hollywood examples so we can do some film study and see some real masters using the techniques that I'm using. But let me show you just one of the ways that shutter speed, you might consider increasing your shutter speed to enhance or create a cinematic look. Now, the faster your shutter speed is, so let's just say you crank it up to, let's say you're shooting in 60 frames per second, you crank it up to 1/200th of a second. Well, that's gonna create a sharper, crisper image, almost over sharpening the image. It's going to look, you're gonna see every jerk and every motion and everything like that in it. There's just more data, more frames in your footage. If you are editing in Premiere or Final Cut and you use a digital stabilizer such as the warp stabilizer in Premiere, the more frames you have, the better the warp stabilizer is going to work, because that's more data per, the more shutter speed, the faster your shutter speed, the faster your camera clicks, the warp stabilizer is going to work better because it's got more frames to see and analyze and create a smoother motion. But okay, so why would you use shutter speed and increase your shutter speed? Well, it's obviously personal preference, but I like to increase shutter speed for action photography or action videography. Skiing and workout videos are a really go-to of mine. Obviously, a lot of people may want a different look to their skiing videos, something very smooth and very beautiful, and that's all well and good, but to get that, you have to be A, a really good skier, and B, have a lot of extra equipment. So how do you kind of add a little spice to maybe your gym footage or your ski footage? You increase the shutter speed and you get this look that makes maybe your skier look faster, makes him look sharper, and it's also something that you can slow down and play with. So let me show you an example from a video I did on Schweitzer Mountain. And this is a very good skier that they have here that showed us around the mountain. And we'll see how I use shutter speed. Okay, this is gonna start slow. So obviously I was shooting at a high shutter speed at 60 frames per second, and you're gonna see that here. So it's gonna start slow. Looks pretty smooth when it's slow, right? Because I've got that extra shutter. I probably used a warp stabilizer on it. Here it is when it's not slowed down. Do you see that kind of jerky motion? But it kind of gives you the feeling of maybe he's going super fast. And when you combine it with this slow, you can really sense this guy's like speed and how kind of aggressive he is on the mountain. It's an aggressive look. That's why I like it for the gym when you're getting hard at weights. And then here it is fast, and you can see it when it's slowed down. It looks really extra crispy, and you can just use it that way, a higher shutter speed to enhance your footage. Now, if you're doing a really like a nature documentary, obviously you're probably not going to want to use a fast shutter speed. You're going to probably want to use something a little bit more mellow. Okay? Now, if you're using a DSLR like this, there is a little quirk to these things in the settings in terms of their ISO. In the past, if you are setting your ISO, multiples of 160 are going to give you the cleanest image. Let me show you what I mean. I found an article on it. This is a really weird quirk. So if you have an old Canon Rebel or something like that you're using, this would be something you want to keep in mind. Let me pull up what I mean here. There's going to be less noise in multiples of 160. So if your camera will have an ISO of 160, 200, 320, 500, 640, 800, 1000, 1250. Well, ISO 160, ISO 320, they're going to have, even ISO 640 is going to have substantially less grain in the image than ISO 500. It's a real weird quirk with older DSLRs. Let me show you what I mean here. Here's an article from Petapixel. I'll leave this in the comment section if you actually want to read it for yourself, or in the chat box. But you can kind of see on this image, this is ISO 160 here, a dark image, and you're just getting a feel for the grain. Here's 320, here's 640. All the way down here is ISO 500. So you can see the difference between ISO 500 and ISO 320. even 640 is substantial. So you would want to, if you could, with these old things, use an ISO at 640 over 500 for a cleaner image. Other than that, color and everything, those are up to you. You know, I'm not going to really get into that. Shooting an S-Log versus, you know, a picture profile. It's whatever you're comfortable with. But those are some simple, basic camera settings that you just want to check with your camera before you, you know, to make sure those are all right and looking good and to understand those. Okay, let's get into our next topic and how to make your images look good. Depth of field. This is a really common one you see. We're talking about the silky bokeh that's going on, like you can see behind me where everything is blurry. You probably understand depth of field. But if you don't and you're trying to get a handle on it, let me show you what aperture is, because aperture is important, and that is what depth of field is and how it relates to light. So this is aperture in a nutshell of what your lens is doing. So when you're at f1.4, as you can see up there, your lens is wide open. It is letting in the most amount of light possible. And when you're f8.0, you know, you're closing, you can see how that's closing the lens. You don't, you need more light at f8, you need less light at f1.4, right? And f1.4 gives you that silky bokeh look, whereas pushing the f-stop higher will give you a, you know, everything's going to be sharp look. And that everything is going to be sharp look is not really a cinematic look, okay? Getting depth of field is really what you want to do. And there's a number of different lenses. I don't know what you have. I'm guessing you're going to be around f4. Just almost everyone's going to have some sort of f4 option. Even on a simple point and shoot, you'll have that. And there's a lot you can do with f4. As you get into primes and more expensive glass, you're going to have that 1.4 look. So having depth of field is important. This is when I talk about ND filters. If you want to shoot something wide open in the middle of the day, you need to basically have sunglasses on your lens to cut down that light. Or you can just shoot like super early in the morning and, you know, that'll work too. Some of the other ways you can do it is you can increase your shutter speed. Your phone will do this a lot. If it's trying to cut down light, it'll increase the shutter speed. That will help control light. Do not do that. That makes your image look way too crisp, like we just talked about in the camera settings. Really, you want to have, you know, maybe shooting 60-125 if you're in the middle of a day. Use a polarizer. Maybe you don't get as much bokeh. Now, one of the other ways you can combat that, and if you have a high f-stop lens, is having a zoom lens. You know, when you push in like this, you can see how my lens does it, and you push this into a 120 millimeters from a 24, you're going to get some nice clear bokeh. So let's just go to an example of what you can see, how you can tell a story with some bokeh, and see how I did it. Let's just take this really simple example, a scene from a video I made on the Alice Talks Away loop. I actually made it with this camera, and yeah, at this time I don't have autofocus, and this camera is not really a huge video camera, but I had this little 35 millimeter lens that was able to shoot at f2. So I hiked really early in the mornings and had a polarizer and was able to kind of just use depth of field to tell this story, since I didn't have many fancy tricks with this thing. And you can see how it works. And you can see how you use it. Okay, so let's just start with this quick scene. This is the Sawtooth Wilderness. And you can see how I have focus here and the depth of field here. Kind of gives it a cinematic look. You can see all the bokeh on me right now where I'm leading your eye to a certain place with this wilderness permit thing. It's not like the most engaging thing, action, but you can see how you take something simple like this and just tell a story. Okay, the drone picture, I want your attention here, not on me in the background, and that says something, you know. And then as I walk in, this is another technique that we're going to talk about. Foreground is big, and using foreground when you're using depth of field really adds to an image, right? If you don't know what the depth of field is and you're just on one static image and you don't put stuff to accent the bokeh that you're doing, there's really a waste. So as you can see, we've added some foreground, these really nice spring flowers with focus on me coming through the lane here, really drawing your eye to me. And so there's that part of the story. And then you can switch to I'm out of focus and now the flowers are in focus. And look at that kind of cinematic kind of looking thing. And then here I am walking across the lane. Now this is a wide shot. Maybe most people would set up the camera right here in front of this log because they don't want to walk all the way over here. But I know I'm shooting at f2. If I just put the camera here, it's not going to be as cinematic. It's not going to give me as much bokeh. So if I put it between two trees to frame the scene, I am just now literally framing the image and adding some depth of field, gives it a more cinematic look. Excuse my pack is shitty. Here it is again, just really simple, cinematic, depth in the foreground, just leaves, you know. Here it is where far away is in the foreground and I come through blurry. Here it is where just this in the bottom right hand is a little blurry and this is a little blurry and I'm walking through this bokeh window. Here I'm out of focus. So you can see just how changing it up gives it kind of this mystical kind of cinematic, very beautiful kind of look, especially if you're doing, nature type stuff. Adding bokeh is really important. And I talked about foreground and using foreground in there. A lot of my training comes from not like I went to school and I've done this for so long, but a lot of my training comes from Chad Case, the guy I've worked for all these years, who's been a photographer for 30 years. And a lot of these techniques he taught me, the foreground and how to lead your eye through a frame and stuff. So a lot of these cinematography techniques you can translate right over into photography. So let's talk about a move that you can do with your camera called rack focus. So I think that if you're just starting out and you have kind of a camera without any stabilization, if you're not using a gimbal, you don't need a tripod. You can hold your camera. Holding your camera is movement. Handheld is movement. We'll get into that in a second. But really turning your autofocus off and playing with leading the eye with your depth of field is a really easy way if you don't have any tools to do it. I'm going to show you a clip here that Brett Johnson did. This is not mine, but it's really good. He incorporates leading the eye through a frame. He incorporates foreground to kind of help me tell this story at Boulder Lake. Or this is Louis Lake, sorry. Not like you care. Okay, so this is me just kind of walking out. This is a pretty good shot here, and this is kind of a wide shot, and it's good. You got to mix up your shots. So we're establishing always when you shoot, if you're putting a video together, remember wide, medium, tight, right? You want wide shots, you want medium shots, you want tight shots, and then you incorporate them through the video to give you some balance. So here we go, wide. I look, I'm over here, and then Brett gets this really cool shot, slow motion, foreground, where he racks focus to the leaves in front of me. And I mean, just look at how cinematic he made that look. All he is doing with this shot, all he is doing is this. He is holding his camera. This is his focus ring, and he's just this. That's it. That's it. And he gets this really epic cinematic shot that adds to the wide shot that I've gotten, and we're able to put together this short little scene that works great in a video, a nice cinematic scene, right? How to use rack focus in your video. Let's show another one. This one is with the zoom feature. So remember I said you can zoom in, and we're about to transition into force perspective. This is kind of how you force the perspective, right? Because when you zoom in with your lens, it kind of sucks up everything. I'll get into it in a second. Let's show you how it looks a little bit different versus Alice talks away, which is a prime lens, where you use the zoom feature to get the depth of field that we're going to talk about. This is at Lava Butte here, and you can just see a little bit of the difference. Just a nice little scene. I am zoomed in. Here's how you could tell that I'm zoomed in and I'm not sitting on a wide prime lens. This lake in between Brett and the wall cliff here is actually very far away, right? It's a whole expanse of a lake away, but it looks very close to Brett because I am sucked in at 120 millimeters at f4, and that is making it appear like that mountain is just right on top of him. This is force perspective that we're going to get into as it mixes with depth of field here. So that's the first shot. Here it is. So this is basically the same. This is why I chose this clip. This is basically where the camera was setting the whole time. This is just me going back and forth between the zoom and the 24 frame per second wide, right? So here it is, just zoomed. The camera was sitting in this spot right here where he was putting in water. And you could just see the kind of cinematic look that it has versus a shot like this. Even though I've got foreground in this, if you put the camera on the other side of these trees, you don't get this foreground. There's not as much storytelling. You would just have a mass of water. Here it is again. So zooming to make these aren't actually right up on him, but zooming in and getting that bokeh to get the wood in front of him where it looks like this massive pile that he's kind of putting together. That's using the zoom feature, sucking that wood, sucking him, creating that bokeh of the wood. I even rack focus to it, even though it's very brief and you can hardly see it. You can see there's the focus now racked to it. Combining all of these elements and techniques, that's the best way to do it. And there's the scene. So there's the scene and the story we told in that quick little scene with depth of field. So there you have it, depth of field, foreground. Let's kind of to go into that and talk about force perspective a little bit and forcing the landscape to either look grander or smaller or things of that nature. First of all, let's talk about scale. I think scale is a big one that a lot of amateur photographers and videographers don't really forget. Scale is basically putting an object into your scene that everybody knows the size of to clarify to the audience the magnitude of another object in your scene. That's what I mean by scale. And this is especially true when you look at mountains, right? This is El Cap. It's our El Capitan in the Sawtooth. Let me just show you this shot right here. So this is a pretty good shot, right? I mean, I think it's a good shot. This is El Cap. That is Alice Lake. There's good foreground here, right? I didn't just walk up right up to the edge of the lake there and take a picture. You can kind of already get a sense of the scale and everything using foreground. But this can be better. So how do we make it better? We add scale. So I come through, first of all, you can see that I break up the background. So it gives this optical illusion that, you know, some of that foreground, there's a trail there, and I was able to go through. And now I stand here, and you have an actual reference to a human being versus this mountain, and there's actually movement in the scene, even though nothing's going on. There's now even more going on. There's scale, there's movement, there's just more. So always adding scale is a great way to enhance your photography, enhance your videos. Put the tripod down and put yourself in your photos, in your videos. Let me show you, speaking of photos, some great sense of scale from Chad that I learned this on in his photography techniques. Here's like a photo from Egypt that he did, and you can just see how if you just take the side of a pyramid and shoot it, you wouldn't understand how big that hieroglyph or whatever it is. When you add the gentleman standing in the doorway, you now understand the sense of the magnitude of this, right? So that's a good sense of scale. Let me show you one where he did a photo twice, one with scale and one without. So here it is. Here's the Grand Canyon. It's a good shot. I mean, it's a pretty good shot. This is a pretty famous part of the Grand Canyon, and Chad's obviously executed a lot of good photography techniques, rule of thirds, the line that we'll talk about here, getting ahead of ourselves. Let me show you where he adds scale to it and see if we like that better. It's the one that ended up winning the award. He won an award for the one. And I mean, this is probably opinion, but once you put the person in the photo, it's now just telling more of a story, right? It's telling the story of this person that's enjoying this place. There's a sense of scale. You can see, you understand the landscape a little bit better. So that's scale in a nutshell. So use more scale, add yourself, add cars, add things to your footage is a technique that can really help you force perspective. Another really easy move that you can do that I kind of like is the Dutch angle. The Dutch angle is a real simple technique where you just turn your camera slightly. And let me show you how I use the Dutch angle in cinematography effectively. Because it's kind of a hard one to master, but it just gives your videos a little edge, okay? This is a video from Loon Lake. This is a downed World War II bomber. It's kind of eerie. We're doing eerie music. It's twisted. There's all these names. There's twisted metal out here in the middle of the wilderness. Okay, so this is like a perfect example of the Dutch angle, right? This is not level. I have turned the camera, and what that forces your perspective to see is this piece of scrap metal that I am trying to imbue with the feeling of looming over us, right? This is kind of a creepy vibe. And if you want to get that, setting it at this angle where this fills the frame and it's kind of crooked and it looks like it's almost coming, even though I'm higher in the frame, it's coming down on me. You can see how we just try to give that vibe by twisting the camera, twisting metal. Here it is again, even though it's subtle inside, here it is again, very subtle. You can see it's very subtle. It doesn't have to be a lot, but it kind of looks like I'm walking uphill even though it's on flat ground. Let's see. This is not a Dutch angle, but you can just add it. Don't overuse, don't overuse. Oh, here I talk about the plane. Here's the plane, just to give you a sense of it. Here it is. See how these aren't even as cinematic as what I was just showing? And then when you get into this, like this is a Dutch angle. We're back to the twisting metal. Here it is again. Just more of that foreboding sense. And if you need to know where the story takes place, there it is. So the Dutch angle is a trick, another trick of forced perspective that you can use with any camera, anything, to just give yourself some more of a cinematic feel. Thanks, Luke. All right. Let's get into some more here. Just checking to make sure the feed was live. Here's our last thing that we'll talk about, forced perspective. I just want to give you a little show on it before we get into touching on movement. How are we doing on time? Oh, we're doing good. We're flying. I said an hour. Here's another example of forced perspective. Here's a good rule of thumb. Never show, try to get out of your own eye line. So if you're standing up and you're holding the camera up here at your eye line, that's probably not a good shot. It's something that we've all seen, right? We look through there, we all see that. Try to get down, crouch, go under, go over. Like, don't put that camera in the position that at a spot where normal human beings tend to look with their own two eyes. And you'll be amazed at what you find. Obviously, sometimes you got to put the camera there, but sometimes not. Like and you can get cool things. Like, for example, this is in the Sawtooth, and this mountain is not right on top of it. This is Elephant's Perch. This mountain is the iconic piece of this wilderness. And I want to give this feeling before we even see the lake of this iconic piece. So I'm down at a low angle, right? And I'm actually zoomed in a little bit to make this mountain appear like it's closer than it actually is. Remember, when you zoom in, you get that effect and you get this looming effect. And when I walk up to it, boom, you get that image, right? And that's better than pointing the camera straight at me in my eye line. This is telling a story here that we get into. And I'm at the lake. I think this is actually wide and not zoomed in, but a little bit more in this of how I use forced perspective. How you can, this is just an interview setup again, the mountain behind me. It's kind of forced perspective, but this is definitely wide. But this is how you can, this is a good shot of in terms of, you know, forcing perspective. There's actually a dude right here, if you can't see him. And then these mountains, there's a vast canyon across these mountains. So there's a vast lake. There's then this place with this guy fishing. There's a big canyon, and then there's these mountains on the other side of it. And when you zoom in like this, it sucks it all together and it fills the frame, right? We want it to fill the frame. And it would be way better of a shot if this guy was actually fishing and he was wearing a bright red jacket, but you get the idea. That is how you use forced perspective in the mountains. You could see this is where I was standing, right? You use the forced perspective, there it is, and then you back out and you get this wide shot, and it gives you some different stuff. Let's talk about movement and how we can, and we're starting to combine all these things, right? When you add forced perspective, Dutch angles with depth of field, and slowly we build on our technique and stuff like that, and you get amazing results. So movement is something tricky. If your camera, some cameras have stabilization, some don't. We're going to talk about not having a gimbal. Just one of the philosophies I have, this is totally just opinion, but I feel like there's a time and a place for a gimbal, and I like handheld a little bit more, and I think we as viewers are starting to see the gimbal a little too much, where it looks like a robot. And I actually like some handheld, a little bit of this, a little bit of movement in my shots. So this is normally how I'd hold my camera right here. It's really important, kind of have your elbows tucked, and then use your body to move the camera, right? When you have your arms out like this and you're really trying to use your arms, it's really hard. So if you don't have stabilization or anything like that, close to your body, being able to look and just using these nice controlled movements can go a long way. And again, we're going to talk about foreground and moving across foreground and how you can add to your movement without actually having to move a whole lot. Nice and steady, right? Unless the scene calls for it, which we'll get into a little bit. The other thing is, I like to slide. Let me face you. All right, so there's this really old trick that I think is kind of newsy you've probably heard of. It's a pan. So a pan goes like this. And there's a pan. And a lot of people do this. You're just rotating your body, right? I don't like that look. That to me looks very old school, very newsy, not as professional as some of the modern stuff. If you're going to, I would rather you slide. I would rather slide. So I kind of look like a damn, here, I'll show you. I look like I'm doing, I don't know, I'm doing yoga moves. Look, I'm in my yoga thing when I do this. Like, this is how I'll shoot. I will slide just with my legs, like this. More so than like this, right? That's a pan, difference between a pan and a slide. And I encourage you to just do some of those nice slides. It also seems to be more stable for me. So just remember, handheld versus slide. Now, I said you don't need any equipment for any of this, and you don't when we're talking about handheld, but obviously a tripod goes a long way. Let's talk about the difference between tripod and handheld, and let's actually take a look at one of the best movies, I think, of all time, a totally underrated movie, a movie that I studied a little bit in school, and that is the movie Seven with David Fincher, made by David Fincher with Brad Pitt, Kevin Spacey, and the voice of God, Morgan Freeman. And it's the famous scene, it's the what's in a box scene. And here I will show you how a master utilizes handheld movement versus tripod movement, and how you just might, if you're doing something, just think about these things and how it relates to a scene. Because when we can pull off these techniques with intent, that's when we're really at our true craft, right? When we're putting stuff together with intent like David Fincher, that's when we are off the chain. All right, there's no audio to this, but we'll watch. Let me just jump over to it real quick. No spoilers, but like something's in the box and it's not good. If you haven't seen this movie, like, holy crap, what are you doing? So let's just start here. This is the best scene. So before we get into all this, this scene, God, I don't want to give this away. Morgan Freeman, this John Doe, who is a serial killer, has been asked as his kind of last request, I will show you where my next victims are if you take me to this place. And these two detectives go out to this place with this serial killer, and all of a sudden a box is delivered. It's a package. Morgan Freeman has opened it, and as you can tell by Morgan Freeman's face, it's not a good package, right? Okay, let's get into the scene. So how Fincher progresses next with movement is really a masterclass. This movie is flawless, by the way. You can do a whole film study on this movie. And he starts with this shot. Not this shot. This shot. Now, why does he start with this shot? This is a shot to establish that John Doe, that's actually his name in this movie, is totally within control. This is a feeling of superiority, right, with the camera underneath him. It is rock solid, mounted to a tripod. This is the person David Fincher is signaling to us with this that John Doe is in control. Brad Pitt is on a handheld camera. Brad Pitt is slowly going to see his world crumble around him. Steady as a rock, starting to get a little bit shaky. Steady as a rock, moving around. Steady as a rock, who's in control of this scene? Like, you can tell, we have no audio and we can tell who's in control of this scene, right? And we're starting to see just the slow breakdown of Brad Pitt's whole psyche, shaking in the helicopter, all this movement, slight movement on a gimbal as he reveals some information. That slight little movement just as he reveals something to the character. Look at him full on running with the handheld as chaos starts heading to the scene, right? He doesn't even try to put this on any kind of gimbal, this run that Morgan Freeman does. They're just full-blown handheld. Back to the person in charge, rock solid on a tripod from underneath, once again. And he reveals to Brad Pitt just like this devastating news. Here we are on the handheld. Look at how shaky it gets now as Brad Pitt understands what's happening. He's trying to say, look, what's going on? And look at how much, still rock solid, shaky between these two, rock solid, shaky between these two. I mean, you're just seeing it fall apart, right? I could go on and forever, but you get the idea, right? How David Fincher is just using simple simple shake to add to the scene and let you know who's in charge, who's breaking down, how fast it's going. As the world collapses around Brad Pitt, you see him add more shake. That's a relationship between handheld and stabilization that you see like real top directors use. I kind of got a little bit on a side tangent there, but I think it's fun if you're actually thinking about handheld just as a movement, using it in that way. So be subtle and smooth, get out of your eye, use foreground. Let me show you some practical effects here of how you can do it. And again, speed, whether you want to slow something down, whether you want to speed something up, how you shoot your movement is really key. All of this was done handheld that you can see. Okay, let's just start with this by Brett Johnson. These are simple little, what we like to call almost a rotation, where you slide and you slowly like use your hands to tilt the camera like this while you slide. So the movement ends up going like this, and you get this really subtle slide around effect. Let me show you it in action. So here I am, Brett's performing the move. We are going to slow this down. So a slow, very subtle, look at that. It's almost like it's very subtle again. There's gonna be a focus pull too. Brett is kind of slowly moving. Here he comes, he's doing that slide and almost rotation you can see. Like that, really subtle though. And look at how beautiful that is. Nice job, Brett. I mean, my face too. No, just really subtle, adding some slow motion, adding some subtle movement, not needing a gimbal or anything, gives you this really romantic looking, beautiful feel. Look how that adds to the nature of the scene, or the feeling of nature and peace, right? There's peace in that scene. Unlike that really shaky, nasty stuff that we saw in 7. Let's just show a little bit more movement where this is a little exaggerated movement that you'll see, not in a slow-mo. This is my mom and I going across the winds. Now the winds are this kind of, we're in a different scenario here. We're going a lot of miles. It's kind of violent. It's windy, obviously. That's a big part of the story. And we'll just see some simple moves that I use to show her movement and stuff like that. This is in no order or anything. I just want to give some examples of movement. So we'll just start out with the simple walk, right? You're on a ledge here. It's kind of dangerous. It's kind of windy. How do we add that feeling? Now, normally if you were to walk behind someone with your handheld camera and you were going for really smooth, it wouldn't work out. But in this scene, hey, we don't need smooth because this is kind of a messed up looking walk. So let's play it. Yeah, it's shaky, but it kind of gives you the feeling of like you're on the cliff edge, you're shaky with her. The wind just blowing her around. Here's just something real subtle that you can do, obviously, going from your lake to your subject. Here's another this is so dumb, but when you're incorporating movement, thinking about movement, think about the direction that you're moving, right? This is such a simple shot. It's a trail sign. The arrow is pointing in the direction, so move with the direction. Wouldn't it look weird if you panned this way? If you panned from right to left, away from the arrow, it's gonna look weird, and it's gonna feel weird, I promise you. So pan in the right direction, push in the right direction. This is just really subtle, handheld, a little just kind of wraparound movement again that we talked about. Handheld again, that one. Here's using foreground to add to your movement, right? If you're just following someone, there's not as much life to the scene. Again, this is like middle of the day, just a random path out there. This isn't something crazy that we do, but yeah, just going across with movement and stuff like that. Real subtle movement where you're sliding over towards your subject, just show where she's going, slide with her. See that handheld, how it just kind of looks, yeah, you're moving, but it's nice. It's almost like you're walking with her poles.
that's something subtle. This is a good use of force perspective again. But like, I could have put this on a tripod. I had the tripod right next to me. Make the conscious decision not to, because look at all that wind. I kind of want it to feel like I'm being blown too, like you're feeling the wind. Again, a subtle choice. I don't know. Just, again, more foreground. Here's a force perspective. Here's a slight tilt up because, you know, big rock, right? Just little subtle movements here and there, little subtle movements, rack focus. And this is how you get more out of your scene than just following someone with your GoPro, right? Here's another one where it's just, let me show you where it's a little quicker, okay? So on this one, we are leaving. This is the end of the video. We are going to bounce out. We want to bounce. We're hustling out from the sawtooth. So our cuts are going to be quicker and our movements are going to be quicker. Again, it's the feeling. It's just a feeling you're trying to imbibe, right? You have Brett's slow-mo stuff with the coffee. Now you're trying to run away from, I don't know, the trail. You're trying to hustle, okay? So our movements are a little bit sharper. Again, still incorporating foreground with our movement and depth of field. When you add it all together, you get a more cinematic look. But you're going to see the movement just become a little quicker, a little bit more handheld. Honestly, that doesn't, there we go. And we're just jamming out. Actually, that wasn't a whole lot of movement, honestly. But I guess subtle movements, quick cuts, gives you kind of the feeling of, hey, these guys are leaving. They're on their way out. Honestly, now that I look at it again, it's not as much as the other one. But you get the idea, right? If you want to add quicker movements to a quicker scene, that would work. All right, what else we got here? I think we're almost there. Let's talk about lines real quick before we get out of here. So the real way to framing is obviously super important if you think about just cinematography through a photographer's eye, right? Framing is important. And there's this concept in framing, I guess, I don't know if it's technically the term for it, but lines, leading an eye through an image and creating the correct lines in a frame to just give you a more balanced frame. I think the way to explain it is to show you, because it's a little tough to explain. Let me try to find you an example. So here you go. I want to show you an image real quick, and I will explain lines to you. Take a look at this image. It's not a great image. I mean, it's just me sitting on a rock. But this image is kind of incorrect. It feels kind of unbalanced, right? I don't know why. There's this big, there's no lines. See, what you have here is not an eye leading you through the scene. What you have is an image split in two. And the line that's splitting this image is coming right down here through the middle. And on one side of the image is this big mass of just me on the rock with these trees right behind me. You could see how this could be its own image, right? Right here, cut off. And the other is this just massive blob that's really doing nothing, okay? I have not correctly lined up this image. It's a poorly constructed image. Let me show you the correct way to do that image. And it's really subtle, and this isn't an award-winning image, but it's a really good example. Okay, so now I've just changed the camera angle, right? And now you have at least a cohesive, balanced image. You can see these lines leading your eye through the frame, through the center. This would be a line here. This is a, whoops, sorry. This is technically a line here. You know, these lines that are leading your eye to the center of the frame with the subject. Instead of it looking like two different images, the photograph actually leads you through it more linearly. And that is an example of the proper way to do it and the improper way to do it. Let's just look at these side by side. And if you're like, dude, I can't see a difference, well, maybe you can't. All right, sorry, I'm setting them up side by side so you can see. All right. So there you have it. And you could just kind of see the balance in the two, right? How one is just blocky on this left side, and this one just looks like a more balanced and correct image. I think when you see it like this, it's hard to dispute which is the better image. So that is an example of lines. Let me show you another couple examples with just photos that, because it's really easy to see with photos that Chad took. Now, Chad doesn't do a whole lot of messing up. So I don't have an image that he did wrong in a comparison image, but let's just take a look at this image from Iceland, right? So here you can see lines executed perfectly. He's got, the line is going from right here around up to the people, and then it leads you across to this area and this mountain, I don't know what it's called, and connects. A beautiful use of rule of thirds, shutter control. This is, if you have a high f-stop, f22, this is the same in cinematography. If you want that sunburst, you need to increase your shutter speed, not your shutter speed, your f-stop, your aperture, close down that aperture, that gives you the sunburst. But this is a correct use of lines in an image. Not always straight through an image, but left to right and up, those are correct lines. So I see a lot of people kind of struggle with lines where you just think about it and you just, like you have a lake, right? You have a lake, it's a beautiful lake. Lake, mountain, and you take a picture of that. Lake's the foreground, mountain. There's no scale, there's no lines, it's just this wide mess. Like, the mountain looks cool to you from there, but in terms of the context of that picture, it doesn't look cool. So lining it up correctly, using lines in the correct way, that's really can add to your scene. Let me show you just a final scene that kind of incorporates a lot of this that I recently did. This is Yellow Jacket. It's a scene from Yellow Jacket in the Hawaiis. I use force perspective a lot with my drone. My drone has a feature to zoom in. So you're gonna see some force perspective in this. You'll see some technique of depth of field. You'll see movement. A lot of the movement is with the drone because I was by myself. But you can see how we incorporate just a lot of different elements to make this scene super cinematic. Obviously, cinematic, making something cinematic. If you have something that looks cool, that helps. As you can see, this is the drone, but this is what I'm talking about when I have it zoomed in. This is making the ridge look, all those mountains kind of look a little bit closer than they are. It's not as wide. So that's that sucked up force perspective effect that you're getting even from the drone. Whereas you can see from this shot, this is just wide. So this is not the zoomed in look. So this is going back to a wide look, and you can really see the difference, right? That mountain is way closer than the stuff you just saw. Like, this thing right here is way closer to me than all the crap you saw than this stuff. But because we're wide versus pushed in, it looks super far, okay? See, again, this is still wide. You can just see how everything looks a little bit farther. This is pushed in again, right? We're coming up over, and you can see with the subtle movement, even with the drone, as I push and I tilt the little lens. I know that you can't do this with a drone, but you know, subtle movement is still nice. And this obviously has the force perspective look. That's why this looks cooler than I think a lot of drone footage you see. I'm using force perspective with movement, with depth of field, because this is kind of out of focus where I'm in focus. So we're still using the elements even though we're using a drone. Don't worry, this whole clip isn't a drone. Here's just a standard wide shot at f22. Now, this is, again, you can see that this is how we are, that high f-stop gives you the sunburst, Now it doesn't give you any depth of field, which is kind of annoying. And this is right end. This isn't the best shot. And you can see it, right? This doesn't look as cinematic. There's no depth of field. There's a big sunburst. Kind of looks flat. It's the middle of the day. It's kind of how it is. Same with this one, just kind of establishing. These are all wide shots. They're not super cinematic. This is a shot that really amplifies that lines concept I was just talking about. You can see the lines super well in this frame, just leading your eye through this frame, outstretching, line, 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 just all leading in that nice way. Like if you just put this flat right here, let's say I put the camera right here, and I think I did a couple times, you could see how just incredibly not as compelling it is because your eye's not being led anywhere. It's stopping at a brick wall. It's 2D. This is a three-dimensional image, right? Now, obviously, sometimes sliding across something, I call this the Wes Anderson effect. This one are lines I've totally thrown out the window. If you know the rules, you can break them, right? And sliding across this and making this just super, almost symmetrical in terms of my rule of thirds is what I was going for here. So my lines are really sharp, but I have the contrast of the colors there. That's why I'm doing it. You can see three distinct colors features here, dark to lighter to the blue sky. And so I kind of manipulated the lines a little bit, right, to make it look cooler. Subtle movement, even though this is with a drone, subtle movement, coming back over to the lines. And this is that forced perspective again. We're zoomed in on this one. As you can see with this one, we're wide. This one, it zooms in, right? These are all forced perspective. We're just bouncing back and forth, zooming in. You're just seeing, this is wide. So again, good structure with the lines, right? This kind of triangle here. See these lines that come to the center of the frame? Just a more dynamic looking image. Fill the frame. Fill the frame. This one, my framing's a little wonky, right? You could see it. It's kind of off, which is cool. I don't mind, but I realize that it's off. It's not as balanced, right? The heavy frame side is to the right here. Okay, back to depth of field. So we've, again, forced perspective with the drone, come back to this really nice line shot, and then here we go back into depth of field to tell the story. Going from wide to super close in the storytelling, right? Here we go again to our medium shot, from close to medium, depth of field. This is in focus. We're kind of sucked up, so we get this mountain back here. Really good balance of the frame. Not to pat myself on the back, these are real simple techniques. Okay, I mean, here's the perfect example of the boring shot, right? Without lines. Like here's the wide shot that I did. Look at how not as cinematic this is. You can't nail every single one when you're doing a YouTube video, right? I mean, it's structured well and good. Again, a really good example of forced perspective with the action being just me, but you can see that all these mountains are very far away, but since we're sucked up on the action, it's giving you this effect. And then this is a good use of foreground and depth of field, as you can see. Once again, sucking up. Even though it's kind of distracting, it just gives a little addition to the image, like almost like you're peering in on this guy and his little adventure, right? Peering from behind the curtain. Depth of field, wide shot. And there you have it, the use of cinematography. And some simple things you can do just with your own camera to better your art. Are there any questions? when you do those slow panning shots, what FPS are you shooting at? I'm trying to learn how to shoot on my Fuji X-T3 and was planning on 4K 60, but I believe I can go to 4K 120. 4K 120 for super slow-mo stuff, like it just depends on when you want to go for 120. Fly fishing is always one that I like to shoot for at 120. Rafting is 120. Mostly though, I stick to 60, Isaac. Like unless it's like when you're going like this, you're already pretty slow. 60 will be plenty, and you can get, you know, better audio. It's easier to edit. So unless you're really planning 120 well, it's difficult. Like plan it for sure. There's a big rapid that this raft is about to come through that I'm making for this show. There's going to be a big splash. Yeah, I'm shooting that 120. I'm also probably picking up a shot at 160, and I'm making sure I can capture the audio. And yeah, it just depends. But majority of the time, 60. And actually, with the automatic stabilization in the Sony, I shoot a lot of those slow pans just at 24, and it's really nice. What are you drinking? Tea? No, I'm drinking coffee. Awesome movie I'll never watch again. Talking about Seven. It is a great movie. It's a great movie. Cool. Let me see if I have that. Did I delete that petapixel thing? Damn it. One second. Let me just leave you with something here, and we'll get out of here. Thank you to everyone who is watching the cooking show with my mom. We had a blast making that, and it was good. Some people like it, some people don't. It's shoulder season here in Idaho, you know? It's kind of mucky out there. Although Tucker and I just went out last week. Okay, this is the, I'm just commenting here. This is the site if you want to learn more about multiples of 160 ISO and the science behind that and how to keep your images from getting grainy. If you have an old DSLR, that's a really good link right there. The other problem with 120 is the massive file size I get, exactly. I'll probably just keep it on 60 then. Also mind sharing the site you use for making that background music. I remember you mentioned it in an older video. I use Epidemic Sound. It's pretty simple. You know, it's a membership, but I think it's like 12 bucks a month. And it's just a ton of music. And then, yeah, when you get a song on Epidemic Sound, Isaac, let me just see here. You have the ability to download the stems. This is like where they take the stems out. The drum line, the guitar, some instrumental stuff. So you can manipulate these songs to kind of make your own music if you want. And it's all licensed. I like the mom vids. Thanks. Is Boise a walkable city or more car dominated? It's walkable. Time to start a free trial then. Yeah, a 30-day free trial. There's a bunch of people also that are like sponsored with Epidemic Sound on YouTube. I'm sure if you just looked a little bit, you would find one of the like their membership code deals. Anyone that does like film school and stuff, that would work. Okay, well, yeah, Tucker and I, so last weekend we went out backpacking, trying to get to Blackwell Lake outside McCall. It was myself and my special lady friend and two people that I met through the YouTube channel that I had never met before, and we all went out and we had a good time. So that is coming up soon. We learned a lot We learned so much about winter backpacking. It's crazy, and I'm excited to share all the lessons learned there with you. And then after that, I'm going to be heading into the Bitterroot Wilderness for some adventures, and of course, more Mom's Bush Kitchen and more live streams. Anyway, happy Wednesday, everyone. Thank you for watching. Go out there and shoot something.